Princess Aralis of the Vayari Empire had been raised in a palace that gleamed like a jewel suspended between twin suns. Its crystal towers pierced the heavens, casting long shadows over the marble courtyards where noble children played at sword, drills, and political games. To the galaxy beyond, the Vayari throne was a symbol of order and authority. To her, it was a prison with no visible bars. From the moment of her birth, Aralis had been bound by duty. Tutors had drilled her in galactic history before she could even write her name. By the time she was 10, she could recite the founding edicts of the Empire in 3 languages. By 12, she was sitting silently beside her father, the Emperor, during council sessions expected to absorb the intricate dance of diplomacy. And always, the lesson was the same. Her life was not her own. She remembered once as a child asking her mother why she was never allowed to run barefoot in the gardens like the servants' children. Her mother's answer had been a gentle smile, but her words had cut like steel. Because, my daughter, every step you take belongs to the Empire, even the ones you wish were your own. Now, as a grown woman, that truth weighed on her every waking moment. Her days were scheduled with military precision. Morning audiences with petitioners, midday lessons in rhetoric and law, afternoons spent in rehearsed discussions with counselors and diplomats. Even the evenings, when other women her age might have danced, sung, or stolen moments of laughter, were consumed with ceremonial appearances. She was never Princess Aralis the person. She was always Princess Aralis the symbol. And yet behind the veil of elegance, her heart ached. The Empire spoke often of alliances, of marriages arranged not for love but for strategy. Already her betrothal had been negotiated, a union with a prince of the Zeeth Dominion, a man she had never met, but who was described in terms of fleet strength and mineral rights. She was to be a bridge between powers, a living contract bound in flesh. When she thought of it, her chest tightened until she could scarcely breathe. Still, she endured. That was what was expected of her. On the eve of her 22nd cycle, the Grand Council convened for a session unlike any other. Representatives of countless species filled the chamber, their banners glittering in the artificial starlight. Aralis sat at her father's side, her expression flawless, her back straight, her hands folded just so upon her lap. She listened, without listening, her mind drifting beyond the drone of voices. And then, the humans arrived. They were newcomers to the galactic stage, a young species that had, until recently, been regarded as an oddity more than a power. Their technology was rough, their customs unrefined, their culture untested. Yet they had earned a seat at the table through sheer audacity, surviving wars they should not have survived, forging alliances where none thought possible. The Vayari nobles sneered at their plain attire, their unpolished manners. But Aralis found herself watching, curious. At the head of the human delegation stood Marcus Hale. He did not bow as deeply as the others. He did not drown his words in flowery phrases or deferential tones. Instead, he spoke plainly, with a voice that carried more honesty than most in that chamber could bear. When his eyes swept across the assembly and landed on her, something strange happened. For the first time in her life, she felt as though someone were looking past the crown, past the silks, past the careful posture, straight into her. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Later, as the meeting adjourned and she walked among the nobles, their compliments and praises flowing like a river of meaningless words, she found her mind returning again and again to that human, to his calm defiance, his unshaken stance, and above all, the way his gaze had not treated her as an object of duty, but as a living being. In the silence of her chambers that night, staring at the stars beyond her balcony, Aralis pressed a hand to her chest. For the first time, the walls of her golden prison felt thinner, For the first time, she wondered what it might be like, what it might feel like, to live for herself. And it was because of him, the human who had dared to see her. The council chamber of the Veyari Empire was a place of endless noise. Voices layered over one another, alien dignitaries arguing, demanding, trading barbed words disguised as diplomacy. Princess Auralis sat in her usual place, regal and silent. Her presence required, but her voice unwanted. She was there to be seen, not heard. The walls were carved from crystal that shimmered in the chamber light, designed to remind every visitor of the Empire's wealth and dominance. Yet to Auralis, those glittering walls felt suffocating, as if they pressed closer every time another noble recited a speech she had heard 100 times before. It was in that monotony that her eyes wandered. And inevitably they found him again, the human delegate, Marcus Hale. He was not like the others. Where the counselors sat stiff with formality, Marcus leaned back in his chair with a casualness that bordered on disrespect. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, as if keeping time to a tune only he could hear, while the chamber buzzed with speeches that tangled themselves in ceremony. His gaze drifted lazily across the room until, once again, it met hers. Auralis felt the jolt like a current through her chest. She quickly looked away, ashamed at her own reaction. But curiosity gnawed at her. Who was this man who treated the Galactic Council as though it were a tiresome play rather than a sacred stage? Later that evening, the endless deliberations gave way to a state dinner. The banquet hall overflowed with nobility. Alien musicians played delicate, haunting chords. Servants glided between tables with trays of rare delicacies, and speeches dragged on far longer than the food remained warm. Auralis sat at the head table, smiling when appropriate, nodding when required. Yet she felt herself unraveling inside. The hall was full, but she had never felt so alone. When she finally managed to slip away, it was to the balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The night air was cooler here, fragrant with blossoms that glowed faintly under the twin moons. She leaned against the rail, staring at the stars, and allowed herself, for just a moment, to breathe without the weight of expectation. "Beautiful view," a voice said behind her. Auralis turned sharply. Marcus stood there, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed as though this were not the most guarded palace in the Empire. "You should not be here," she said, her voice carefully measured. "Probably not," he admitted with a grin. "But after the third toast to eternal friendship among the stars, I figured no one would miss me." She raised an eyebrow. "You presume much, human. That is dangerous in these halls." "Maybe," he said, "but you look like someone who's been waiting for a door to open that never will. I thought you might want company." The words struck deeper than they should have. She bristled. "You know nothing of me." He shrugged, unfazed. "I know the look of someone who's trapped. I grew up on Earth with nothing, working 3 jobs just to keep my family alive. I know a cage when I see one. Yours just happens to be decorated with jewels." Her violet eyes narrowed, though her heart thudded at the bluntness of his words. No one dared to speak to her this way. No one. And yet, something inside her wanted to hear more. "And what would you know of? Freedom, Marcus Hale?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. He leaned against the railing beside her, close but not imposing. "Everything. Because I fought for mine. I made choices, hard ones. Some cost me dearly, but every scar is proof I lived my life on my own terms." Silence stretched between them. The night breeze tugged at the silken folds of her gown. She searched his face, half expecting to see arrogance. Instead, there was only sincerity. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken to her not as a symbol, not as an untouchable princess, but as a person. "Your words are dangerous," she murmured, though her tone lacked conviction. "Truth usually is," he replied. Aralis turned back to the stars. For so long, they had been distant lights above her cage. Yet tonight, for the first time, they seemed like paths leading outward, toward something unknown. That night, long after Marcus had left the balcony, his words lingered in her thoughts, and though she tried to banish them, they refused to leave. For the first time in her life, Princess Aralis wondered, not what the Empire demanded of her, but what she herself desired. The days that followed the balcony conversation unsettled Princess Aralis in ways she had never imagined possible. Her life had always been a script, lines memorized, movements rehearsed, expressions perfected. Yet Marcus Hale had taken that script and torn it in half with a few simple words, and now she couldn't stop thinking about him. The court noticed changes in her demeanor, subtle though they were. Her laughter, rare, quiet, and carefully measured, now escaped her lips more easily. Her eyes, once always downcast or deliberately focused on dignitaries, seemed to drift, searching. She lingered in places she once hurried past, but what they could not see, what no one but she herself knew, was that she was seeking him. Their meetings began as accidents, passing in the palace corridors, exchanging polite nods, sharing brief words after council sessions. But soon, those chance encounters turned deliberate. A stray walk through the gardens when she knew he often wandered there. A pause in the archives, where he had been studying Veyari law. Always brief, always veiled in the pretense of duty. But each encounter stoked a flame she had never felt before, and with every conversation, her world grew wider. Marcus spoke of Earth in ways that painted vivid pictures in her mind. He told her of summer rains that fell heavy and warm, where children danced barefoot in puddles without reprimand. He described forests that stretched farther than cities, untamed and wild, where one could walk without guards or ceremony. He spoke of firelight and song, of friendships forged without contracts, of choosing whom to love and how to live. To Aralis, every word was intoxicating. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life not bound by duty, but such imaginings were perilous. The whispers began quickly in the palace halls. Courtiers noticed how often the princess and the human were seen together. Nobles whispered, behind their sleeves, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Rumors traveled like wildfire, that the human sought to sway her, that she was vulnerable to his strange charm. Her betrothed, Prince Kale of the Zeeth Dominion, was the first to confront her directly. He found her in one of the private courtyards where she had gone to steal a moment of quiet. His presence was as cold as the steel armor he wore, his voice sharp as a blade. "You dishonor yourself," he hissed, his reptilian eyes narrowing. Walking so freely with an outsider, with a human, Aralis lifted her chin, her regal composure, intact though her heart hammered within her chest. "I walk with whom I please. You belong to the Empire," he snapped, stepping closer. His words dripped with entitlement, with the certainty of one raised to believe all others existed for his gain. "And soon you will belong to me. Do not forget your place, princess." The words struck her like a lash. For her entire life, she had swallowed such reminders without protest. But now, something inside her resisted. A voice, Marcus's voice, echoed. In her mind, "I fought for mine." Her lips parted, and before she could stop herself, the words tumbled free. "I belong to no one." Kale's expression darkened. His claws flexed at his side, though he did not dare strike her in the heart of her own palace. "You will regret those words," he spat before storming away. Aralis stood trembling, but not with fear, with exhilaration. For the first time, she had defied the chains. Later, she found Marcus in the gardens once more, leaning casually against a tree, as though he had always belonged there. She told him of Kale's words, her voice hushed but fierce. Marcus listened without interruption. When she finished, his lips quirked in that infuriating, disarming half-smile. "Sounds like you finally said what you've always wanted to." Her heart skipped. It felt terrifying. And yet it felt right. He finished for her. She nodded slowly. That night, as she lay in her chamber, staring at the crystal ceiling above, Auralis knew her heart had betrayed her duty. She was a princess of the Veari Empire, bound by law, betrothal, and tradition. Yet she longed for the human who had shown her what courage felt like. Her heart no longer belonged to the Empire. It belonged to freedom. And it was Marcus Hale who had awakened it. The storm that had been building in the shadows of the palace finally broke. Whispers became accusations. Accusations became demands, and soon the Council of the Veari Empire summoned Princess Auralis to answer for her conduct. Rumors of her closeness with the human had spread far beyond the palace walls. The noble houses called it a scandal, the priests of tradition called it blasphemy, and her betrothed, Prince Kale, called it treason. At the center of their fury stood Marcus Hale, accused of corrupting the heir of the empire. The verdict was swift. The humans were to be expelled. Their delegation would be escorted to the borders of Veari space and forbidden from returning. To ensure the stability of the empire, Auralis was commanded to appear publicly and denounce the human, affirming her loyalty to her people and her betrothal. For Auralis, it was a command sharpened into a dagger. To obey was to return to the cage. To defy was to betray everything she had been raised to honor. The day of the ceremony arrived, heavy with expectation. The grand hall of the empire, vast and glittering, was filled with thousands of witnesses, nobles in their finery, warriors in their armor, emissaries from a dozen alien worlds. Banners hung from the crystal arches above, proclaiming the glory and eternity of the Veari, and there, at the center, stood Marcus Hale. Surrounded by guards, stripped of dignity but not of courage, he waited. His gaze was calm, his posture unbowed, as though this grand display of imperial wrath barely touched him. When Auralis entered, silence rippled through the hall. She wore the ceremonial circlet of her station, her gown shimmering like liquid starlight. Every eye turned to her, every ear waited for her words. Her father's command rang in her mind. "Denounce him! Say the words! Show them where your loyalty lies!" She stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was steady, trained by years of duty. "As Princess of the Veari Empire, I am bound by duty, bound to uphold tradition, bound to obey, bound to sacrifice all that I am for the Empire." The hall murmured approval. Prince Kale smiled coldly. Her father gave a solemn nod. But then she paused. Her gaze lifted, searching until it found Marcus. He did not plead, did not flinch. His eyes held hers with quiet strength, as if saying without words, "The choice is yours, Auralis. No one else's." Her chest tightened. Her breath caught. For a moment, centuries of tradition screamed within her. Her lineage, her training, the weight of her people's expectations. But beneath it all, like the steady beat of a drum, she heard the voice Marcus had given her. "I fought for mine." And so she drew in a breath that felt like fire. Her hand lifted to the circlet upon her brow, that golden band that symbolized her. Chains. With deliberate slowness, she tore it free. Gasps filled the chamber. She let it fall, and the sound of it shattering against the marble floor rang like thunder. "I am bound no longer," she declared, her voice fierce and unshakable. "Duty without freedom is slavery, and I will no longer be a slave." Chaos erupted. Nobles shouted, priests wailed, Kale surged forward with rage twisting his face. But Aralis stood firm, her eyes never leaving Marcus. "I choose my own path," she said, her words carrying above the din. "I choose freedom." For a heartbeat, the hall seemed to freeze. Even those who despised her could not deny the power in her defiance. Marcus, still surrounded by guards, allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Not triumph, not arrogance, just quiet pride. The Emperor rose, his voice booming like thunder. "You dare defy the Empire, child!" Aralis turned to him, her posture straight, her voice steady. "I dare to live." And with those words, she shattered more than just a crown. She shattered the illusion that the Empire's chains were unbreakable. That night, while the court reeled and factions plotted vengeance, Aralis and Marcus fled. Their escape was perilous, dodging patrols, outwitting guards, relying on the unlikely alliance of a few sympathetic souls who believed in her cause. By the time the suns rose, a Veyari warship burned on the horizon, and the princess was gone, but not lost. For the first time in her life, she was free. The stars stretched endlessly before them, no longer cold, distant lights beyond the crystal walls of her prison, but a living ocean of possibilities. Aralis stood at the viewport of the human vessel, her fingers pressed lightly against the glass, watching the streaks of hyperspace blur into infinity. Behind her, the hum of the ship was steady, unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. Gone were the sterile corridors of the Veyari palace, where every step had echoed with judgment. Here, the air smelled faintly of metal and oil, and voices carried with a rawness that belonged to people unafraid of being themselves. It was imperfect, and it was beautiful. Marcus Hale joined her at the viewport, his reflection appearing beside hers. He carried no crown, no robes, no symbols of power. Only the quiet assurance of a man who had carved his own path and survived. "You know," he said softly, "you've just declared war on an empire that doesn't lose wars." Aralis turned to look at him, her violet eyes calm, her posture no longer that of a princess reciting lines, but of a woman who had chosen her own truth. "No," she said firmly, "I haven't declared war. I've declared a life." He studied her, the corner of his lips twitching in that familiar half-smile that had once unsettled her and now anchored her. "And you don't regret it? Leaving everything behind? The palace, the crown, the safety of power?" Her gaze drifted back to the stars. "Power that suffocates is not safety, Marcus. It is a gilded cage. I regret only that it took me this long to see it." Silence lingered between them, but it was not heavy. It was the silence of understanding. As the hours passed, the crew of the human ship treated her with cautious curiosity. To them, she was not "Your Highness" or "Princess" of the Veyari, but simply Aralis. Some avoided her. Others greeted her with tentative nods, and one even dared to ask if she knew how to cook. The question startled her more than any assassination attempt ever had, for no one in the Empire had ever asked her to do something so ordinary. Later, as she sat in the mess hall, listening to laughter and arguments over card games, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. These humans were rough, unrefined, and utterly unlike the polished courtiers of her home. But they were real. They lived without masks, without scripts. And slowly, she felt the weight she had carried all. Her life began to lift. But freedom was not without cost. News traveled fast through the galaxy. The Veyari Empire had denounced her as a traitor. Kale swore blood vengeance, promising to reclaim her as his possession or destroy her for her defiance. Warships were already mobilizing, their banners of conquest spreading fear. Marcus laid it out plainly when they gathered in the briefing room. "They'll come after us. Not just for you, for me, for my people. You've set fire to their throne room, Aralis, and fire spreads." She looked around at the faces of the crew, men, and women who had already risked much simply by helping her escape. Fear flickered in their eyes, but so did determination. "I never asked anyone to fight for me," she said quietly. "No," Marcus replied, leaning forward. "But they will, because you showed them that even empires can be defied. You've given them something worth fighting for." The words struck deep. Once, her life had been measured in alliances forged by treaties and marriages. Now, it was measured in choices, in courage, in the belief that her destiny was her own. That night, standing once more at the viewport, Aralis whispered to the stars, "I am no longer Princess Aralis bound by duty. I am Aralis bound by nothing." Marcus joined her, his presence steady at her side. "So," he asked, "what will you do now that the galaxy's wide open to you?" She smiled, a smile not rehearsed or painted by obligation, but born from the core of her being. "Live for the first time, live, and fight not for an empire but for freedom, for mine, for yours, for anyone who dares to reach for it." For the first time in her life, the stars did not feel like distant watchmen of her cage. They felt like companions, each one a doorway to a future she could claim for herself. And as the ship carried them into the unknown, Aralis knew she had traded 1,000 thrones for a single breath of freedom, and it was worth everything.